All right, everybody. Good morning. My name is Bill Wilmoth. I'm a partner in the law firm of Steptoe and Johnson in the Wheeling, West Virginia office. And I also have the honor of being the president of the Discover the Real West Virginia Foundation. It's great to have you here for this Value of Carbon and Coal in West Virginia's Energy Future virtual forum. Of course, we all understand that renewables will play an increasingly significant role in reducing carbon emissions as we go forward. But most experts agree that the best way to tackle climate change is to pursue an approach that takes advantage of every possible strategy to reduce greenhouse emissions. Today, we will focus on the more immediate impact of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS. We have an extensive and impressive list of speakers and panelists lined up today. We are delighted to have with us Senator Joe Manchin, who is chairman of the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and Brian Anderson, executive director of the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization, and director, National Energy Technology Laboratory at the U.S. Department of Energy as keynote speakers. Special thanks to the Honorable Jennifer Granholm, U.S. Secretary of Energy, for providing recorded video remarks for today's program. First, a few thank yous. We want to be sure to thank the people behind the scenes who have helped to put this program together. First, a brief shout out to the hardworking executive director of the Discover the Real West Virginia Foundation, Sarah Deering, without whom nothing happens in this organization. Also, thanks to Senator Manchin's staff, both in West Virginia and DC, who have helped us put this program together. Ryan Thorne, Armando Avila, Zahava Urecki, Luke Bassett, and Pete Stolly. Also, thanks and great recognition to Kimberly Van Camp with the Jackson Kelly Law Firm for her wonderful assistance with the technology today, and to Jackson Kelly for hosting this webinar, and also to Kelly Goes for her coordination efforts in this area as well. I also want to recognize the members of the Discover the Real West Virginia board who are in attendance today. In addition to their work as board members, many of their companies or employers also generously contribute financially to the foundation each year. Ellen Capolanti of Jackson Kelly PLLC, Brad Hall of Appalachian Power, Jason Harshbarger, Berkshire Hathaway Energy Gas Transmission and Storage, Tom Haywood, Bowles Rice LLP, Diana Lewis Jackson from Action Facilities Management, Jerry Mullins from Westlake Chemical Company, Patrick Robertson from Confluence Government Relations, and Lisa Chamberlain from the Mountain Health Network. Also, program sponsors, you see a slide on the screen there. We would not be able to hold events like that without very generous support from our sponsors. Our lead sponsor is Orion Strategies, especially Curtis Wilkerson. Orion also hosts and updates the foundation's website, and we very much appreciate that. Our gold sponsors today are Appalachian Power, specifically Brad Hall and Chris Beam, Blue Rock Manufacturing, specifically Rick Barton and Judy Shepard, Confluence Government Relations, specifically Patrick Robertson, Jackson Kelly PLLC, specifically Ellen Capolanti, and West Virginia University, specifically Fred King and Suzanne Bensel. As an organization that's worked to grow West Virginia's economy for more than 25 years, the Discover the Real West Virginia Foundation is proud to host this program and to highlight such an important topic related to West Virginia's energy future. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage is expected to play a key role in the reduction of greenhouse gases globally. Fossil fuels, including coal, will continue to play an integral part in our nation's energy mix for decades to come. And most experts agree that investing in and advancing these technologies is needed to ensure our nation's energy security while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're excited to have a great lineup of speakers and panelists who will explore the opportunities and challenges to advancing carbon management and removal technologies in West Virginia and across the nation. In addition, speakers will discuss the work that manufacturers across the state are doing in the coal to products market and the commercialization and economic opportunities and challenges that exist for entrepreneurs and innovators to advance carbon management technologies in West Virginia. Before we begin, and I promise we will, a couple of housekeeping details. Each of you has been sent a program booklet that includes full bios of our speakers, so we will skip long formal introductions of our panelists to allow plenty of time for energy experts to speak to important issues and for questions to be asked. Next, please note that audience members can submit questions through the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to indicate which speaker you're addressing your question to or whether it's for an entire panel. Questions will be asked following our keynotes remarks as well as following each panel, time permitting. While we may not be able to ask all of the questions, we will try to get your questions answered either in the time allotted today or following the program. And finally, please note that there are no breaks built into our schedule. This is a virtual event, so if you need a second cup of coffee or need to go to the bathroom, by all means, feel free. We have a great lineup of speakers and panelists today and much to get through, so let's get started. First, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Joe Manchin. He needs not much of an introduction, so I won't give him much of one, but I think it's important to note that he has done great work for the state of West Virginia and the country, and also note how fortunate we are in an energy state to have him in such a leadership position now as chairman of the U.S. Senate's Energy Committee. My friend, you're up.
Bill, thank you for that kind introduction. It's always good to be with all of you and all my friends. I see Brian on there, and we're all working very close together. It's a pleasure to be today to talk about carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. You know, coal's been the bedrock to our economy in West Virginia for many years, and CCUS provides the opportunity to reduce our emissions globally while helping us maintain jobs and create new economic opportunities domestically. Nearly all the studies that have examined the potential pathways to net zero carbon by 2050 have found a need for a significant amount of carbon capture and carbon removal. In fact, Dr. Birol of the Nonpartisan International Energy Agency has consistently said that CCUS could be the most critical technology for us to invest in to meet our climate goals. This is the facts that we're dealing with today. And people, some of my friends on the environmental community don't want to face the facts. And I've always told them, you're entitled to your opinions. You're just not entitled to create your own facts to support your opinions. So this is the fact. Because right now there are 6,603 coal plants operating around the world, coal generating plants. There are only 504 in the United States. But if you listen to my friends in the environmental community, you'll think, they make you think that 504 coal-fired plants out of 6,600 are destroying the world and the climate in the world. On top of that, there's 1,063 coal-fired energy plants being constructed as we speak, none of which are being built in United States, not one. In addition to the benefits of CCUS can provide domestically, it is critical that the United States lead in the way. Only we can develop those critical technologies and get them deployed around the world. I have always said this, you cannot eliminate your way to a cleaner environment. You can definitely innovate your way to a much cleaner environment. And Congress has made significant efforts in recent years to advance CCUS technologies. From the 45Q tax credit to the Energy Act of 2020, there has been a strong showing of bipartisan support for CCUS. It's critical that we invest in research, development, demonstration, and deployment of the entire CCUS value chain, from capturing CO2 from power plants and industrial facilities to transporting and then utilizing or sequestering that CO2. As chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and as a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I'm committed to ensuring the implementation of and full funding of the $6 billion that I included in the Energy Act of CCUS. Going forward, we need to couple these efforts with necessary modifications to 45Q tax credit to really incentivize the deployment of these projects and advancing legislation like the SCALE Act, a comprehensive CO2 infrastructure package that I was pleased to co-sponsor and happy to see included in President Biden's infrastructure plan. West Virginia has been and will always be and continue to be the leader in advancing these critical technologies. And I'm so proud of the work that the National Energy Technology Lab, NETL, is doing under the leadership of Dr. Brian Anderson, who is with us today and to lead the way in CCUS efforts in the development of technologies to use coal in new ways. And I can't tell him how important and what a leading role NETL is going to play in this transformation. It's important that West Virginia be well positioned to take advantage of the ample opportunities for CCUS in the state. The CCUS value chain, from capturing the carbon to storing it, for putting it to good use, has substantial economic and environmental potential and should be a key part of conversations around economic revitalization. By 2030, the CO2 utilization market size for products like concrete, fuels, and chemicals has potential to reach over $800 billion. That's with a B. This would represent about 7 gigatons of CO2, equivalent to 15% of global emissions, which is unbelievable. In addition to the use of coal as a feedstock to produce high-value products is a promising field. These new uses for coal can produce products superior in quality and durability to conventional ones, including certain lightweight, high-strength building products and materials like carbon fiber. The demand for carbon fiber, graphite, and graphene will experience double-digit annual growth in the years ahead. These new uses for coal also have potential to provide new economic opportunities and revitalize traditional energy-producing communities who've been hit extremely hard by the energy transition. This is going to have a great impact on West Virginia. West Virginia workers help power this country for generations, and they stand ready to play a crucial part in our country's energy transition with all these new technologies coming on. In closing, let me reiterate the tremendous potential of CCUS, both to provide clean, baseload power and economic opportunities. West Virginia is ready to lead on this technology in partnership with the Department of Energy and the National Energy Technology Laboratory. And I stand ready to continue to provide federal support in the Senate. I believe we'll now hear a few words from my good friend, former governor of Michigan, now Secretary of the Department of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, on DOE's efforts to advance these technologies and support coal communities. And then Brian and I will take a few questions after that.
Thank you, Senator Manchin, and hello, everybody. I am here today because President Biden believes that the men and women who powered our nation today have to play a role as we build the net zero future of tomorrow. And at the Department of Energy, we believe that carbon capture, utilization, and storage, along with carbon dioxide removal, offers these workers tremendous opportunity. Just like Joe Manchin believes it, we believe it at the Department of Energy too. These technologies are going to be essential to meeting our goals for reducing carbon emissions, and they rely upon skills and equipment and expertise that fossil energy communities have in spades. So the Department of Energy has invested billions of dollars over the past 2 decades to do research and to develop the full suite of these technologies. And with President Biden's American Jobs Plan, we're going to invest billions more to demonstrate them and to deploy them. And that means jobs, and as well as $300 billion to revitalize our nation's manufacturing base, which also means jobs, creating good paying jobs, union jobs in these communities, and in other communities as well. But let me be clear. We are inviting folks from these communities, these fossil energy communities, to take a seat at the table as we craft our plans for these technologies. And the input from fossil communities has already guided the White House has this interagency working group on coal and power plant communities. And the input from the fossil community has informed this plan. And DOE, through that plan, just announced $75 million for carbon capture projects and millions more for novel projects like extracting critical minerals from coal mining waste. The point is this: we are eager to make the investments that are necessary to create new jobs and skills-matched work, and support new businesses and deliver prosperity to fossil energy communities in West Virginia and beyond. And we are totally ready and eager to work with you to make it happen. So thank you so much, Senator. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Anderson, who is the director of DOE's National Energy Technology Laboratory. Brian?
Well, Senator Manchin and Secretary Granholm, I really appreciate an opportunity to meet with the Discover the Real West Virginia Foundation group today. As the Senator mentioned, I am now the Executive Director, in addition to the roles and responsibilities at the National Energy Technology Laboratory, the Executive Director of this interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization. It's a mouthful, and perhaps we need to brand it, but it is really about putting together all of the efforts across the federal government, 11 federal agencies, into one pot. And yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide. Putting all of the efforts of these 11 federal agencies across the federal government together on the same effort. And this effort is to revitalize the economies of the coal communities that have suffered over the last 10 years due to mining job losses that we've seen in the reduction of coal. In 1985, coal mining employed about 175,000 people in the United States. In 2020, it was down to 40,000. Coal power generation has gone from producing half of the nation's electricity from 1950 to 2008, producing about 23% now, thus resulting in the considerable job losses that we've seen. So there are communities that are already hurting, and we know this in West Virginia. So as part of this interagency working group, we are working out of the Department of Energy, but across both the White House, as you can see in the logo soup on the right, the Department of Treasury, Interior, Ag, Commerce, Labor, DHHS, Transportation, Energy Education, EPA, OMB, and the Appalachian Regional Commission. So when we put all of the heads and resources together across these federal agencies, we truly believe that we can make a difference in communities like we have so much across the state of West Virginia, Appalachia, and not to forget New Mexico and Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana as well. Particularly when we look forward into the next 15, 20 years for deep decarbonization, we can see that these employment numbers and the economic dislocation has a tremendous potential to adversely affect communities. And so the interagency working group was established in the executive order signed by President Biden on January 27th. There was a very fast turnaround. In 60 days from the signing of that executive order, a report was due to the president. So at NETL, we volunteered and we stepped up and we assisted with the White House and the Department of Energy to get that report done, because we firmly believe that this is in the interest of our communities, so that we can put the right investments into the coal and power plant communities across this country. And so this interagency working group, we are staffing it up today across all of the agencies that are listed here, as well as at NETL. And so you can go to the next slide. As part of the report, we identified 25 priority energy communities, largely based on employment statistics. You can see these rankings are based on the relative percent of coal employees in these districts and these areas identified by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so this is helping us guide the initial priorities of the communities that we want to understand the existing resources and the potential for investment across the government. We also identified up to $38 billion in potential funding across the 11 agencies specific to these coal and power plant communities. And I will say, this is not just a big number. This is a number that at the last interagency working group, and just so you know, the interagency working group itself is made up of the heads of those 11 agencies. The secretaries or the administrators are all on board to make a difference in these communities. And I'll share with this group, because it's a group that many of you know me as a native West Virginian. I would not have signed myself nor NETL on to this effort unless I thought it was going to be real. And so, in fact, it is in my belief and certainly as part of our mandate to make real impact in communities across this country, shown here in some of the priority communities, to make that real impact, not just to create jobs, but to create family sustaining careers. As we know, in West Virginia, we had a tremendous population decline. One might call it an exodus over the last decade. When we look at the largest population decline in the country, we need to reverse that, and we need to create the types of careers and the career paths that folks can see the potential and move back into West Virginia. So on the next slide, it was already mentioned, we announced $109 million worth of funding in conjunction with the Interagency Working Group report, $75 million in carbon capture projects, which is the topic of today, another $20 million in critical mineral extraction from coal and associated waste streams, and a $15 million project at West Virginia University with Sandia National Lab and geothermal energy that I know that Jim Wood is speaking later today. Probably not on that, but on CO2 projects. This is only the start. We are working on an hourly basis to identify the potential funding streams, not just in the Department of Energy, and certainly carbon capture and sequestration is a big portion of that. But again, across the federal government in terms of Economic Development Agency, the Department of Treasury, Department of Ag, and want to keep making sure that we have real projects that are going on the ground in our coal and power plant communities. So moving on to carbon capture and sequestration on the next slide. As many of you may know, we've worked on CO2 capture and sequestration for over 25 years at NETL. Those billions of dollars of investment, we have seen a tremendous decrease in the cost of carbon capture over the last few decades, and with the implementation of 45Q creating a market for captured CO2 in the subsurface, we are starting to see that demand side pull for these technologies, because the next step is moving it to commercialization and continuing to lower the cost of carbon capture. So a big part of what we do at NETL is in lowering the cost of carbon capture, ensuring that we're reducing the risk of CO2 storage in the subsurface, while simultaneously advancing hydrogen technologies and moving into the negative emissions technology space through direct air capture, leveraging off of our long history of CO2 capture. All of this is also with a focus on reducing water consumption, which again aids in the sustainability of our energy across the whole board. And so on the next slide is our roadmap, our technology pathway for how we are deploying commercial scale carbon capture and sequestration projects. You can see backing up to 2017, these were large capsule pilot projects were initiated, as well as in the subsurface, the storage feasibility for integrated CCS projects. Moving through today and into next year, we're looking at carbon capture feed studies that will be completed. These feed studies, this feed means front-end engineering design, is a very critical step toward the construction of true carbon capture, integrated carbon capture projects. We are also moving to commercial scale storage complexes to have final characterization of those through a program called Carbon Safe, targeting in 2025 integrating CCS projects and having them be deployed at large scale, while continuously pushing down and driving down the cost of capture toward 2035. All of this is part of a very comprehensive portfolio that not only includes CCUS, but value-added carbon. We'll hear later today from Bill Easter is one example of a project we've been heavily involved in collaborating with, and it's great to see the successes there, as well as other CCUS projects across our entire portfolio. So again, I'm really happy to be able to join with you today. We can go to the last slide, which is really the closing, and love an opportunity to have a discussion with the senator and with those here on the call. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I do see some questions. Senator Manchin, you are a great champion of bipartisanship and the need to work across the aisle. Do you see opportunities for that with CCUS?
Almost certainly I do, Bill. I think everyone, now that we're getting more and more facts out and explaining to them that, it's called global climate for a reason, because it is entirely the globe that we're worried about. It's not just North American climate or West Virginia climate. Once we can get people understanding the facts, and if you ever get a chance, we ought to have Dr. B-Roll. I know that Brian has heard him before, and he's really something pretty special. We've had him to our hearings in Energy Committee, and he gives you an outlook for the whole world in the last decade, what we've been able to accomplish and what challenges we still have. But with that, absolutely, because it affects us all. John Barrasso from Wyoming, a large coal producing state, is my ranking member. So he's a Republican, a good friend of mine. We work well together. We understand for us to go forward, we have to do something. And the bottom line is the markets are changing. Brian, I think, gave you the statistics of a decade ago, we were producing 40 to 50% of the power through coal. Well, now we're down to in the low 20s. And it'll probably drop a little further than that. But we still need coal is going to play a vital role in our economy. And I think people in West Virginia, the geopolitical challenges that we have, our state has flipped quicker than I think any state in history in 1 decade, from a supermajority of Democrats to a supermajority of Republicans. Those people who believe that the Democrats or President Obama declared a war on coal, and I felt the same at the time, because I knew we were changing. I knew markets were changing, and it was going to be just a matter of time that we had to transfer and go in a more direction, a more different direction. But with under President Trump, I've told people back home, I said, I know you all believe that President Trump was sincere when he said, we're going to bring coal back. In 4 years, he couldn't do it. It went down further. So it's not a politician. It's basically how we transform, how we transfer that opportunity that we might have. Coal is going to play a vital part for a long time. So why not take advantage of it? Why can't we basically reinvigorate? And I know with Bryant, I've talked to the White House many times, and Bryant was being considered, he was the right person at the right time in the right place to make this happen. And not just in West Virginia, but all of Appalachia and all the coal producing, as he showed on the map. These people need help. You can't leave them behind. And the president has acknowledged that. President Biden has acknowledged we're not leaving the coal communities and coal miners and coal families behind. They provided the energy to produce this country to the superpower of the world. And we're going to maintain that status, but we have to do it in a responsible, reasonable way. So carbon capture sequestration, I'm encouraged by all the activity and research and development. We put more money into it. We're serious about finding lower cost ways of capturing it and utilizing this carbon. And we know it's got promising effects. Cement, so many different things. We've seen the demonstration, a young company, a young entrepreneurs won a $20 million, competition. So we know it can be done. We've also been looking at basically with the pipelines to basically send the CO2 out to sea in the seabeds and how it transforms in seabeds. We've been hearing of a lot of promising effects of that to capture it and solidify it and do a good job. But I still think there's an added value that we haven't come up with or haven't basically commercialized yet. And that's what I'm hoping that we can accelerate. How do you take clear stream carbon? We know how to liquefy it. Can we solidify it and use it for building materials or building for added value? I believe that's very close to reality.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Anderson, you've told us that you're the executive director of the White House's energy interagency working group on coal communities. Can you give us a little bit more detail about how working with coal communities is going and what your goals are in this new job?
Absolutely, Bill. And so I think my new job is about 2.5 weeks old. But what we've been doing is right now we've been meeting with a lot of stakeholders across the coal communities. We will be rolling out the stakeholder engagements because there really is a need not to swoop in and as some of the comments and questions that are coming in, particularly, I'll use this to highlight Ed's comment about Southern West Virginia needs more than grants and studies. And so what we're going to do is the staff at NETL, again, I mentioned we're staffing up. What we're doing is having a set of community town halls in the very near term, stakeholder engagements, working with development offices and communities and existing organizations like Coalfield Development Corporation that has been doing some great work. And so we understand where the communities are today. Not every community is the same in terms of some have great economic redevelopment plans and they just need to be able to get those off the ground with the assistance that might come from various components of the federal government. Maybe it's Department of Transportation, maybe it's Department of Commerce. Then some communities need assistance with developing their economic development plans. And so every community is, our method is going to be working in each community to identify the specific needs and pathways and to move beyond grants and studies. And that's where I wanted to highlight Ed's comment. It's absolutely right. We, the very next steps that we have, stakeholder meetings, community town hall engagements, and then ultimately we will be targeting setting up a one-stop shop where certainly if a community has an integrated economic development project that might include revitalization of a sewer or city water system coupled with some economic development work in setting up the investments and innovation centers. An integrated project needs to have that one-stop shop to be able to touch multiple components of the federal government. And that's where NETL was a great choice in my opinion, because we have a long history of working as the only government-owned, government-operated laboratory in the Department of Energy space. We manage big programs and projects as well as have a deep bench when it comes to our resources. And so our goal is to then set up that one-stop shop where communities can bring us integrated projects and we can move those forward. The last piece I want to say when I say the family sustaining careers is we ultimately need to move some supply chains as we have seen announcements out of Detroit or out of the auto industry moving toward even the announcement of the new electric Ford F-150. We're going to see a big shift in supply chains in the automotive sector, and that's one particular example that we need to be able to move those supply chains into our coal communities to create manufacturing jobs and these long-term sustainable jobs across our region. So that's
Hey, Bill, can I add to something what Brian's been saying on that?
Of course.
Okay, let me just say this. With all this happening right now, we need to play to our strengths, first of all. West Virginia, we have to realize where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are and how we play to that. And that means through these meetings that Brian's setting up and everything, we'll have our representatives there too. But we want to hear from people. And what do you think? I'll give you an example. We have Hatfield-McCoy Trails turned into one of the greatest attractions as far as ATV riding. Well, why can't we attract an ATV manufacturing plant? Okay, with the 48C tax credit, we're putting $4 billion, 30% tax credit for any manufacturing. I think West Virginians are tired of hearing we're going to retrain you and retrain you and retrain you. They're retraining us for jobs that never come. And basically all it is a glorified unemployment extension. So we're not in for that. I can assure you, and President Biden knows we're not. The other thing we're talking about, and I'm having a problem with the electric vehicles, the way they're going, because right now, when you have renewables such as wind and solar, and now they want EVs. Those are foreign supply chains. We do very little of that in manufacturing. And I've told them, I said, get your head out of your butt right now and start looking at what we can do. Hydrogen is something we can do. Brian knows that. We can do blue hydrogen. We can do green hydrogen. We can do so much. And when you're talking about trains and all the heavy stuff that we have to move equipment-wise, hydrogen is a much better way to go than EVs. And that can create real jobs right in West Virginia. So we're big on that one. I want to make sure that happens. As far as infrastructure, Bill, we have got to complete Corridor H. We have got to basically have Coalfields Expressway and King Coal Highway if the South's going to have a chance. And we need to finally do the job that we should have done many, many, many years ago on Route 2. I'm tired of crossing over and have to travel in Ohio to get back down to West Virginia and cross across the bridge. So these are the things we've got to plan. And the president's willing to work with us on that. We're putting money towards it. Brian's in the right position to direct it. And basically, we don't throw money away, but do something that's going to give jobs. They talk about all these renewables. What are you talking about? Erections, installation? Because you're not talking about manufacturing. China has a market on that, on the cells as far as with the solar panels. And if you're talking about windmills, Brazil's got a pretty good market on that. We're talking about computer chips. Taiwan's got the market on that. We better start doing something again, and that's what we're trying to do. And we want to show them that West Virginians can do it. I say, give us a chance to build you something. These people are innovative and creative. They've had to survive in the coal mines, in the coal areas. And they're basically able to transition to whatever opportunities we give. That's what we're trying to highlight. And it can be done, buddy. I am convinced of it. I'm just so proud Brian is where he is. We're going to make this happen. I'm going to push it from my end. Shelley and I are working together on this. We'll give Brian all the support he needs, and we'll make something good happen.
Thank you, Senator. Let me ask a question from the audience. Are you actively looking for CCUS sites in West Virginia? And what are the key characteristics of a CCUS site as far as subsurface strata is concerned? And that's for either or both of you.
Brian?
Yeah. So Kevin, the answer is yes. And we have for some time now. There's the Mountaineer site in Mason County, AEP's site that was one of the early sites of our CCS work. West Virginia is part of the Midwest Carbon Sequestration Partnership under Battelle's leadership out of Columbus. And so we have the U.S. Carbon Atlas at NETL that you can find some more detail. And as far as the key characteristics, it's a good caprock and good lower boundary on the site, a high permeability, so you can create some injectivity. Those are the key characteristics that we're looking for. But just this brings up just one thing, if I might, Bill, that the infrastructure necessary to be ready for wide-scale deployment of CCUS is another big component of where we need to go. So as the senator has talked about with hydrogen infrastructure and CCUS, CO2 pipelines and the like, we need to get in front of. And so I think that West Virginia and the Appalachian region will play a major role in creating hydrogen hubs and CO2 hubs into the future.
All right, sir. Thank you. We have 2 or 3 minutes left over. Senator, let me ask you to talk a little bit about the importance of having a voice like Dr. Brian Anderson as the head of this working group. What are your hopes for this group?
Well, the bottom line is Brian knows Appalachia. He's a product of Appalachia, so he knows it very well. And I think he's well respected because they know his capabilities. So when we were talking to the White House and they were going through 2 or 3 different names, and I sat down with Brian Dietz and different people within the White House and Ron Klain, the chief of staff, and all that, and the president, we spoke, and they said, we want to do something, have someone who understands what challenges we have. It says, you got the best person you're considering now in Brian. So the stars have lined up. We're to bring a lot of attention and honor the people who have Build America, which is basically the coal communities, the coal families that have basically given their all. And they know exactly how I feel. They asked me one time, they says, what about, how's West Virginia? And I says, You mean, you want to know why West Virginia has changed geopolitically within 10 years quicker than any other time in any other state in any area? I said, they feel like the returning Vietnam veteran. We've done every tough job, taken our orders and done it as well and better than anybody can do it. And then it's almost like we've forgotten, left behind. And President Joe Biden says that will not happen. I agree. It's not going to happen. We need West Virginians to have hope and faith and get involved. And they have to, these town hall meetings, we want them. What do you think is going to work for your area? What would be the best thing? They've never been asked that. As politicians, sometimes we always think, well, this will work well here and work well there. If the public's not going to accept it, and if they can't start telling their children, you've got a future right here at home. You've got a future right in West Virginia. And that's what we need to do, Bill. So it's going to be a challenge, but we've never had this much attention before and this much money willing to be invested. And we have to do it and do it right. And that's what we're working on now. But without internet, without roadways and things of that sort, it's a little bit of everything. But we have the value of coal is still going to be there. If anything, it'll be more valuable. We use it for higher valued products than just basically heating up water and steam and coal. Our metallurgical coal is still the best in the world. So it does. We're going to have base load to a certain extent. If it wasn't for coal-fired plants, all of Texas would have still been down. So they understand. They're having a hard time, but FERC understands it. I'm talking to them continuously. Then basically we've tried to stop them from closing any nuclear plants. If you want to meet your carbon emissions, you can't get rid of nuclear. That's for darn sure. But you have some of our environmentalist friends need to get with it and constructive dialogue with all of us, not just basically their wish list, because it's not going to happen from elimination, I can assure you. The rest of the world's not going that direction. And I'm more concerned that we do something that's great for the climate, for the whole world. So I think West Virginia is in a unique situation to show how we can transform our opportunities and our economy. And we have different parts of the state that are still doing very well. Eastern Panhandle is growing. Morgantown, Central, a lot of chances for the high-tech corridor in the Fairmont area in that. But in some of our more remote areas in Southern West Virginia, that's where our attention needs to be to help them basically reinvent themselves. And I think we can.
Major thanks to our keynoters today, Secretary Granholm, and particularly to Senator Manchin and Dr. Anderson for getting us started off. We appreciate you and we appreciate your help today.
Thank you, Bill. Hey, Brian, see you later. Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, let's move to our first panel. I'm proud to introduce this first panel entitled Reducing Carbon Emissions Through Research and Innovation, which will explore the opportunities and challenges to advancing carbon management and removal technologies and the necessary intersection and collaboration between public and private sectors to reducing the nation's carbon emissions. I'll introduce our panelists one at a time, and then we will take questions after the four panelists have finished. Our first panelist is Shannon Angielski, who is Executive Director, Carbon Utilization Research Council and Principal Government Issues at Van Ness Feldman LLP. Shannon?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for the invitation to join you all today. Following on the heels of both Senator Manchin and Brian Anderson is going to be a tough follow here, but we'll do our best and look forward to questions. So briefly, I am Shannon Angielski, as mentioned, Executive Director of the Carbon Utilization Research Council, and that is really going to be the focus of my comments today briefly. CURC is an industry and research organization that is focused on the sustainable use of our nation's fossil energy resources. And over the past 10 years or so, we have focused on technology solutions as it relates to carbon capture and carbon management from the use of those resources. We worked very closely with Senator Manchin over the last several years in the development of the energy provisions that were included in the Energy Act of 2020 And it was due to his leadership and his real drive to make sure that we had a very comprehensive and robust approach to the public-private partnerships for research, development, and demonstration that we were successful in seeing that bill get enacted with those very comprehensive and very significant funding levels provided for the Department of Energy to undertake those programs. So, and it was what I would say really is a couple of things as it relates to this administration's actual, what I would say is probably an overly ambitious goal to have the electric sector achieve net zero emissions by 2035. And using that as just simply a starting point for this conversation, I think it's really important to recognize that implementing those provisions that are outlined in the Energy Act, particularly as it relates to providing very significant grant dollars for commercial projects, is going to be critically important. We need to accelerate that investment if there's any ability for this country to achieve those, to achieve any 2035 potential goal. The bill would provide what would be hundreds of millions of dollars, quite frankly, to undertake those commercial projects. And so we are working with Congress and the administration to ensure that funding is provided in order to do that. I will just wanted to build on the conversation as it relates to hydrogen that I heard both Brian and Senator Manchin discuss. And I missed the secretary's comments, but I have heard her speak very much in support of the department undertaking efforts as it relates to hydrogen. And what I will say is that there's a real opportunity, as Brian and the senator pointed out, for hydrogen and as it relates to Appalachia. There is a coal opportunity, there is a gas opportunity. Decarbonizing hydrogen, fossil fuels is a new market to produce hydrogen is really going to be a potentially new and emerging market domestically as well as internationally. The US has such significant gas resources and coal resources that this can be done with fossil fuels. It's going to be the most inexpensive proposition to decarbonize fossil fuels to produce hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, is going to be the first step rather than using renewables, which is a much more expensive proposition. And want to point out that there is at least one project that has received federal funding recently, and this is located in Indiana. It is a project that received grant funding to gasify coal with biomass. Once you produce the syngas, you would remove the CO2, strip it from that gas stream, and they are going to capture and divert that CO2 to a geologic reservoir on site and produce decarbonized hydrogen, and they will use that hydrogen to produce electricity. This is the Wabash Valley Resources Project in Indiana, and it's simply important to recognize that there is potentially new markets for our fossil resources with additional federal support that will be needed to transition our economy to a hydrogen economy. So I will stop there with my comments, but just simply want to conclude by saying that the public-private partnerships are going to be critical here. And it's with leadership like that demonstrated by not just Brian, but also Senator Manchin, and particularly as chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, that is going to be critical for us to maintain technology pathways for fossil fuel resources and to be part of the decarbonization agenda with this administration going forward. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, Shannon, thank you. Chris Beam is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Appalachian Power. Chris?
So good morning, Bill. Thank you very much. Also want to thank the foundation for the opportunity today for a great discussion. And also agree, following Senator Manchin and Dr. Anderson's always a tough act to follow, but we'll give it a shot here this morning. So I do have a few slides here this morning we'll go through. But the slide presentation today is really, it's a summary of AEP's overall climate impact analysis. That project to do that analysis was completed, and we issued that of March of this year. It's a comprehensive analysis of what we believe the future could look like. And then for this panel discussion today, I really want to concentrate on really what AEP, the overall corporation, and then Appalachian Power, which is an operating company within the AEP family, on what our ongoing efforts are to reduce carbon emissions, and how we recently released the analysis, how it will inform our strategic planning and decision-making as we go forward, because I think that's pretty crucial to understand what's kind of driving our thought process. Next slide, please. So what are our goals? We have recently revised our carbon goals. We did that in the first quarter of this year. We have now committed to a net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And of course, I think folks truly understand net zero doesn't mean we're a zero emitter. It means we still have some emissions and we'll offset the ones that we cannot do away with. So our 80% reduction by 2030, which is also an increase. And so I know folks have talked earlier already today, but we'll talk here in a little bit about there are some technology that doesn't exist today, and some advances to some technology that does exist today that's going to be required for us to get there. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So next slide, please. So what is the strategy, right? So we've already heard folks mention renewables today, and I think everyone's well aware that's wind and solar and even a little bit of hydro. But we have to look at transforming really our fossil fleet. So that is our coal-fired and our gas-fired fleet. We are doing scenario planning. We'll talk about that here in a couple of slides. But the most important thing, and I think folks have alluded to it already, but I want to touch on it again, is the investment must ensure that we continue to have a reliable, a resilient, and most importantly, affordable and secure electric power system going forward. Between the Texas storm we just witnessed and also with the gas pipeline, I think those things kind of bring to a highlight that while it may be functional, we need to make sure it's always functional. And of course, we want to do that while we engage our employees in really any of the transition or the affected communities that we may be in. So next slide, please. So our climate transition analysis is really what I wanted to spend most of the time talking about here this morning. So if we could go to the next slide. The company really completed a 2 scenario modeling effort. And I know this is, so we are a heavily engineering company, so we're not too creative on names. So we came up with a business as usual strategy. And then we came up with what we call a fast transition strategy. And really business as usual just assumes the planning that we usually go through. We do assume a carbon price will go in play in 2028. And you can see on the slide there, we priced that in at about $15 a ton. And we show that escalating at 3.5% a year over year. Fast transition, same thing, a carbon price, but we double the price to $30 a ton, but then also keep the same escalating price going forward. A couple of things in the scenario though, make sure folks understand what we're talking about. We do talk about electrification. So electrification, you'll see it either as some or more. That's really low tech, basically saying that is the industry is changing over from a prior energy source to electricity. We also talk about EVs. So of course, those do stand for electric vehicles. I know everyone knows that. And then of course, we reference the EIA here for technology costs. And EIA is the US Energy Information Administration. It is probably the sole source of the best information to use. It is updated very regularly, and that's the information we like to use when we look at either new technologies or forecasted pricing of new technologies going forward. Next slide, please. So what does the future generation look like? Did we miss a slide? Can we go back one slide? There we go. Oh, I guess it's not in there. So what did we learn from the scenarios that we modeled? There's a couple of things that I think are pretty interesting. So one, out of both scenarios, we can reduce our CO2 emissions greater than 90% by 2030. Depending on the carbon policy, which we don't know what that's going to be yet, but depending on what that may end up being, we could actually get to less than 5% of our carbon emissions from 2020 levels by 2050. Of course, so as we talked earlier, not to zero. So we would have to basically offset any of the remaining emissions. Both cases do show an increased build and use of wind and solar with a decreasing reliance on coal and gas over time. The fast transition accelerated our coal retirements. I figured everyone would assume that. The one thing that we were surprised about out of the modeling effort, though, was the model did not select large levels of energy storage, and it did not select non-emitting resources, which was very unexpected for us. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but just really can't stress enough that technology advances, they have to happen for us to be able to get there. Next slide, please. So this scenario shows what does our SO2 reductions look like going forward. Really, so the light blue bar graph and the orange bar graph really represent business as usual in blue, fast in the brownish orange, and really the line graphs are either the base or the fast transition. And really what the graph shows you is we get to about 98% under our current scenario planning, but cannot get to zero. And I think that's the piece that the folks need to really understand. It's there's not a technology out there today that exists that can get us to zero. And so we have to offset the remaining emissions. So in closing, so the analysis, right, it is the driver of our business strategy for years to come. We'll update it as the years go on. It is critical, though, to our success to keep electric rates affordable and our generation reliable for our customers. And as the modeling scenario suggested, there are multiple paths how to achieve the important goal of a clean energy future. And then from our perspective, a key consideration on the path to net zero is really about adopting solutions that are both technology and economically beneficial for the regions we're in and our customers. And Bill, that wraps up my prepared remarks. So we will turn it back over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Our next speaker comes from one of West Virginia's crown jewels, the Toyota Motor North America organization. She is Kim Minke, Regional Director of Government Affairs.
Well, thank you, Bill. I really appreciate being here today, and thank Discover the Real West Virginia for putting on this discussion today. It's been great thus far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion as well. As one of the original environmental engineers 35 years ago for the first wholly owned Toyota facility in Kentucky, I'm proud of the focus that Toyota had on environmental sustainability from the very beginning of construction and then into the operation of our facility. As a company, we've continued to evolve and maintain that focus, providing our customers with the products that they want, meeting their mobility needs, and transitioning to better products that reduce emissions one step at a time, utilizing our philosophy of that continuous improvement that we do every day. Considering the need for improved fuel efficiency and the reduction of greenhouse gases, we introduced the Prius, a hybrid technology, in 1997. The addition of a battery and electric motor to a gasoline engine to supplement the propulsion system, and the battery being able to be recharged by braking and the gasoline engine. Today, with more than 2 million Toyota hybrid vehicles on the US roads, from sedans to SUVs, we estimate we've reduced 76 million tons of greenhouse gases in the US without the need for additional infrastructure. But that's just where the story begins. In addition to our hybrid technology, new breakthroughs in plug-in, electric, and hydrogen fuel cell technologies are continuing to build better vehicles for the road and for the earth. But with this shift to alternative fuel sources come the need for evolving infrastructure, as we've discussed today, beyond just gasoline stations across the US, to also be providing charging stations for batteries and now refilling stations for hydrogen tanks. Back in 2015, we announced the Toyota Challenge 2050, moving forward a future society in harmony with automobiles and nature, including Included in this challenge are 6 challenges is our carbon challenge. We commit to becoming carbon neutral in 3 important areas of our business. First, in our manufacturing and logistics operations. For example, here in West Virginia, in addition to our plant ongoing energy usage kaizens, those continuous improvement activities, we're also developing and utilizing green power and generated from solar farm on site there in Buffalo, and the purchase, as Chris mentioned, wind powered turbines on the Grant Mineral County line with the BlackRock wind operation. So if we can't get there, we are looking for alternate ways to offset. And so these are all steps towards the goal. Our second area of business is our supply chain. As we look at the vehicle life cycles and looking at the materials that come to be developed, all that needs to be put into a carbon neutral perspective. And so we're sharing best practices with our supply base and helping design vehicles for the future. The third major area that we have are our products. With a goal of 90% reduction in vehicle emissions by deploying a variety of vehicles in development in all types of propulsion systems, including gas, hybrid, battery, electric, and the fuel cell technologies. But beyond carbon, we also have challenges in water reduction and reuse, recycling-based materials, and biodiversity that round out that Toyota Challenge 2050. We've begun the steps towards these challenges. We just announced our 7th 5-year environmental action plan, where we set targets and measure our performance towards actively meeting those challenges. We'll set the next 5-year action plan in 2025, making improvements, again, one step at a time. We find that what gets measured gets done. And so that's the way we take it, one step at a time. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of fuel cell driven electrification, however, is its scalability. We can use fuel cells for propulsion, but we can also power small facilities with a fuel cell. The opportunities are immense as we continue to develop the renewable sources for the hydrogen infrastructure that's needed. The need to reduce emissions across the transportation, commercial, and community sectors is dramatic, it's increasing, and as Senator Manchin mentioned, it's global. And where these sectors converge, such as in the movement of goods, we've found opportunities at our ports. In partnership with the state of California, we've deployed a large fuel cell at our facility at the Port of Long Beach that we will make the facility powered with 100% renewable energy by using dairy biogas as our hydrogen feedstock. At the port, we also have developed fuel cell powered vehicles for moving containers within the port. This pilot has led to additional partnerships with Toyota, Hino, and Kenworth to jointly develop a Class 8 fuel cell electric truck for the North America, where we have the necessary hydrogen infrastructure. At Toyota, we're creating vehicles that are safe, practical, and fun to drive, while at the same time working to ensure our vehicles are at the forefront of environmental engineering with a broad array of electrification options for our customers. With a new technology to fully implement and get the benefits, the infrastructure needs to be developed and maintained to properly commercialize these new technologies with both electric charging stations and hydrogen fueling stations across the country. I've got to tell you, it's an exciting time to be in the auto industry. Thank you, Bill. That's what I've got for my prepared remarks as well. Thank you.
Okay, Kim, thank you. And our final panelist on this panel is Jim Wood, who is the director of the WVU Energy Institute and also the director of the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center Advanced Coal Technology Consortium. Jim?
Thank you. Before I jump into the first slide, let me go back to something Brian said and just explain a little bit about what the Energy Institute and WVU is doing in respect to this subject. As you know, or you might know, we sit on an ocean of natural gas, and we have some pretty good research going on here that's converting natural gas using a catalyst into hydrogen and hard carbon. That's pretty far along. It's not quite in the pilot stage yet, but it's getting there. At the Energy Institute, we are looking at geothermal. Brian mentioned that, as some people may know, and you can see from the map here, which is not too big on my screen. I hope it's bigger for you all. The part of West Virginia between Charleston, Parkersburg, Morgantown, in that area is pretty warm. You get below the Marcellus and into the Utica, and we know there's some temperature down there. So we're going to dig some wells and see what we can find down there, and hopefully be able to work some geothermal projects out of that if we find the right kind of temperature and rock formation. We also have the rare earth program that WVU is involved in, and we are working on constructing a pilot plant that will go into operation later this spring that will convert acid mine drainage into rare earths and some other critical minerals. And lastly, with respect to some of the other discussion, we also are the manager of the Brownfields Assistance Center for the northern part of West Virginia. And that's a group of folks that go out and try and help small villages and towns in the state of West Virginia that need help getting themselves situated in terms of water, in terms of cable, in terms of other things, to have them situated where they can grow and be conversant in the new economy. Looking at this map here, I put this up because I want people to see where the major transmission lines are with respect to West Virginia. They're in the north and the south, nothing much in the middle. And I'm going to talk only for a few more minutes, but I'm going to talk on the value of coal in West Virginia's economy with respect to electric production. The issue of renewables is also coupled with the issue of intermittency. And so wherever we end up putting renewables, which today looks like it's on the top of mountains, we have to study the effects of what happens if those renewables don't work. In other words, there's no wind, or for solar, there's no sun. And so we need to have some sort of connections, and we need some sort of base load or storage in order to make that up, so that plants don't go dark like Toyota unless they've got their own power. And other hospitals need to have power. So that's a consideration. And based on this, you can see that's something we have to think about when it comes to what we're doing for decarbonizing. Next slide, please. These are some data that compare West Virginia's coal production to the United States. In the slide, MMST means million short tons. So between 2008 and 2019, US and West Virginia production dropped just under a third, both just under a third. And this is per EIA recent data. Production in 2020 was about 400 million standard tons, or about 45% drop in a single year. Note a third of the production in 2019 went to export. I'm not sure how much of this is exported from the United States or just from the state of West Virginia, but nonetheless, it wasn't used here in the state. In 2020, electricity produced from coal in the US dropped to the lowest in 15 years to 774 terawatt hours. And below that, you can see West Virginia produces about 70.3 terawatt hours, or about 10%, down from 13% in 2019. So it's clear from this data that the effect of decarbonization in the rest of the country is coming our way. CO2 produced is about 57 million tons per year, which is about 65% greater than the same amount of electricity produced by natural gas. Theoretically, the CO2 produced would only be 57% greater, but you have to account for the higher efficiency of generation from natural gas over coal. In other words, less fuel burn per kilowatt hour. Third, you can see West Virginia has an advantageous price of electricity. In the table from February to March 2021, you can see that the 2 cents delta between the national and the West Virginia averages for industry is important. Doesn't look important, but a 10,000 square foot manufacturing facility typically uses about 950,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is roughly $20,000 in additional costs versus West Virginia. The next slide, please. Some important issues that these bullets try to point out is that there is a lot of discussion. We've had a lot here today about CCUS, the acronym for carbon utilization, capture, utilization, and storage. Capture carbon and the problem is solved. Well, maybe, but not so fast. Cost is an issue, and cost subtracts from value. Storage is an issue, and more about that in a second. Utilization is a problem. What firm is seeking a source of CO2? Is there a pipeline to get it from source to sink? The West Virginia coal fleet is a target for environmental activists. About 91% of West Virginia's electricity is produced from coal, putting West Virginia at risk. And there are still a matter of NOx and SOx and fly ash and bottom ash emissions from normal coal-fired units. Normally, CCUS advocates intend that captured CO2 be injected underground and that either stored there forever or stored until used. But subsurface injection requires a permit. It's known as Title VI injection permit, and EPA controls the issuance of that permit. The link you see in blue is to a paper that we did for USEA. Dr. Sam Taylor is one of the authors and is a colleague of mine at the Energy Institute. The paper, for those that are interested, will explain the issue and how it affects states across the United States. There are only 2 other states in the United States that have primacy over Title VI, and they are Wyoming and Montana. We understand that Pennsylvania is thinking about that, and I'm advocating that the state of West Virginia think about that as well. Some of the tax provisions that were offered or noted earlier were 45Q and 48A. They are available for developers to try and offset the cost of CCUS, but as pointed out, these tax benefits are at risk. Our senators Capito and Manchin introduced legislation in March to improve the 48A benefits for CCUS retrofits. Right now, 45Q gives a developer $50 a ton if geologic storage is used and $35 a ton if EOR storage is used. Last, we have a reference to the Petra Nova project near Houston, Texas. To my knowledge, it's the only commercial CCUS project on a coal plant in the United States. There's a Shell chemical plant up in Canada and Saskatchewan with similar results to this one. This is the only one that's run for a while in the United States. It was designed to capture 90% of the CO2 from about 250 megawatts of flue gas from a coal-fired plant. The captured carbon was compressed to about 2,000 PSI, which makes it a liquid, and is pumped to an oil field about 50 miles west where it's injected into non-producing oil wells. After pressurizing the field, oil flowed from other wells. Project cost was estimated as $1 billion. It's $1 billion for 250 megawatts of flue gas. And it included about $190 million of federal grants and $250 million of low interest export financing from Japan. This project was done as a joint venture, and the low export project loan was Japan's way of getting MHI's technology into the United States. The project broke ground on February 2014, was started up in April of 2017, okay, 3 years, and mothballed in May of 2020. The project economics failed because the price of oil was too low at about $60 a barrel when the capture system was mothballed. Also, the number of barrels injected per ton of CO2 seemed to me to be low. In the data that I was able to find online, some of it was as low as 1 or 2 barrels a ton of CO2, where other injections are higher than that by triple. So my conclusion for the question of coal value to West Virginia economics is it seems to me to be uncertain going forward, except in an export role. To protect existing West Virginia units must deal with coal residuals, wastewater compliance, and carbon capture, as well as the cost of electricity production, which is the advantage we have today. That's all I've got. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Shannon, let me go back to you first. Your comments about the electricity industry goal of being net zero by 2035 and the need for commercialization and funding, if that's going to happen, intrigue me. Can you talk a little bit about whether the investment that you envision includes renewables? What all do we need to invest in?
Sure. So just to be clear, I wanted to make sure that's not the 2035 net zero objective is this administration's goal. It's not, the overall industry goal. But that said, I think, if you listen to what Chris outlined, I think that there are diverse pathways that I think the industry is looking at pursuing in order to accomplish such an objective. I think the timing is one that is questionable without the investments that are needed for all pathways going forward. But at least just in terms of the technology and the innovation, I think to meet that goal, unlikely are we going to see new coal or at least new coal units being built. It would be a retrofit for existing coal plants with carbon capture that would be needed. But to achieve that goal, it's also going to mean that you're going to have to capture CO2 from natural gas plants, which is not something that we've done very aggressively in this country thus far. But there are projects that are in development, and one thing that will be needed is what Jim pointed out, which is some of these tax credits as well as large grant dollars that could be used. The Section 45Q tax credits is certainly something that we see could have value for projects, but in the current investment environment, it requires tax equity partnerships. And so legislation that Senator Manchin and Senator Capito are working on would avoid the need to go to the tax equity markets to get investment in carbon capture projects. And free up those tax credits to be put into the projects themselves so they could actually get financed and built. So that's something that we are working on to try to get done and accomplished. The other thing that industry is looking at in terms of more innovation that would be needed is, I don't want to sound like a broken record on hydrogen, but I will say that right now, renewables does not have the capability for seasonal backup storage. Batteries cannot fulfill that need, but hydrogen can, and you can store hydrogen on site. So if you have a form of decarbonized hydrogen that you can use as a backup source of generation for renewables, that is another option that industry is pursuing and considering for trying to get to that net zero objective for the electric grid.
Okay.
So that's where I would just say we need more innovation. We need steel in the ground, quite frankly, for carbon capture as well. We just need to be doing more of it. And we will need the federal partnership in order to do that, whether it's through the tax code or whether it's through demonstration grants from Department of Energy.
Thank you, Shannon.
Sure.
Chris, a simple little global geopolitical question for you. Not to pick on India or China, but if India and China continue to add coal-fired power plants at the current rate, and they continue to reject renewables as they have traditionally done, is there anything that America can do to encourage our global neighbors to help the rest of the world out a little bit in reduction?
Well, so yeah, that is a nice geopolitical question for me, so I appreciate that. But I think there is, right? So I think you have to take a leadership role. I think the Biden administration getting back into the Paris Climate Accord is a way to try and do that. But I liked what Senator Manchin said earlier, right? If we own and develop the technology, then you can actually sell that technology or help deploy that technology throughout the world versus someone else developing it and then us using it. So I think that's one good approach to look at. But you have to remember their economies are trying to grow, and they're trying to also, no different than we try to do, find the cheapest alternative to provide energy for their consumer. And so I know James brought up the cost of carbon capture. We built one at our Mountaineer plant and ran it for a couple of years and also have retired it. But it is very, very expensive. But does it work? The answer is most definitely yes. And so I think developments around how to make it more cost effective would be a very good place to focus on for us, and really for the globe for that matter, because this is a global issue. It's not a West Virginia or a US issue, as Senator Manchin alluded to.
Okay, thank you. That was a very good geopolitical answer to a geopolitical question. I appreciate that. Hey, Kim, Toyota has been a leader in the reduction of greenhouse gases, as you alluded to, with the development in, I think you said 1997 of the Prius. Tell us a little bit more about what the future of EVs and hydrogen vehicles looks like. For example, there aren't very many EV docking stations around West Virginia yet. What can West Virginia do to encourage more EVs and hydrogen vehicles?
Thanks, Bill. As with anything else, it's a market-driven activity. And so the consumer is going to dictate what it is that they want, and we have to be there to be able to supply it. So that's why, from a Toyota perspective, we're doing an all of the above approach to electrification. As I mentioned earlier, we started this idea of hybrid technology with Prius back in 1997. And it took a long time for folks to be able to buy into the idea of hybrid technology. You've got those that are really energetic about the emission reductions that come from that vehicle. You have folks that are really active and interested in the reduced cost of operation of a vehicle because they get better gas mileage. Maybe not so much the emissions, but the bottom line dollar. And so we have to look at all the motivations that folks have and help educate folks on what's out there and what are all the benefits of those aspects. As we continue to get more plug-in electric vehicles in the market, I think that will drive the infrastructure. A lot of the federal programs that are out there now are providing incentives to be able to grow the network of charging stations with the various infrastructure bills being proposed. So it's got to be partnerships that make that happen. But it's not all about electric either, because as we've talked about today, hydrogen is a major player here. Because when you look at the ultimate impact of a vehicle's propulsion system, whether it be plug-in electric, you still have to generate the power. And so you still have the impacts of those emissions. From a hydrogen perspective, the emissions coming out of a hydrogen vehicle, hydrogen fuel cell, is water. There are no emissions from that. And so if we're able to utilize sustainable sources of hydrogen, then we're all better off. And we're going to have infrastructure throughout the country, just like gasoline stations, whether it's for plug-in or for hydrogen. But the benefits, as Shannon has mentioned, of storage capabilities just make all the sense in the world.
Okay, Kim, thank you. And Jim, we have like 60 seconds left here. Let me ask you about sunshine. When our oldest son went off to college in Virginia, he called us and he said, "Mom, Dad, do you have any idea how much sun we don't have in Wheeling, West Virginia?" So I think West Virginia is not known. If you look at the list of the sunniest places, West Virginia isn't known much for sunshine. So even with storage capabilities, is solar a practical part of the West Virginia economy in the future?
Thank you for giving me only 30 seconds to answer that. It's unlikely, because of the terrain, that solar is going to play a major role in West Virginia. I mean, I ran a company in Ohio for a while, and we had the same problem in Ohio from roughly September all the way through until maybe March. So I don't think it's a big deal, but I do think that storage will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's plenty of places to put storage in West Virginia and charge it from other parts of the country. And I think I agree with the senator's comments on nuclear. This idea of shutting down nuclear units is insane. They should stay up, and we should build more of them. I hope no more Plant Vogels, but okay. And we're going to have to keep fossil, probably have some fossil conversion, maybe to gas, maybe not, but it's going to have to take some either offsets, as Chris has mentioned, or it's going to have to take some carbon capture.
Okay, thank you for that unfairly short answer. I appreciate that, Jim, very much.
Me too.
Well, let's move on. By 2030, the CO2 utilization market size for products like concrete, fuels, and chemicals has the potential to reach over $800 billion. And the coal to products market has the potential to flourish as well, with the demand for coal products like building and roofing materials and fiber, graphite, and graphene to grow significantly in the years ahead. We're very pleased to have with us today an impressive group of representatives of manufacturers working in this section, as well as a panelist who can speak to funding opportunities for manufacturers as part of our next panel titled Carbon 2.0, West Virginia Uniquely Positioned for Energy Jobs and Manufacturing Growth. As before, I'll introduce each panelist one at a time, and then we hope we have some time for questions at the end. Our first panelist is David Berry, who is the CEO of AmeriCarbon Products, LLC.
Great, thank you, Bill. 1 second, please. AmeriCarbon was founded for two primary purposes: enable the conversion to domestic coal into high-value carbon products and provide an economic opportunity for West Virginia through its vast coal resource. Next slide. So we're talking about unlocking coal's highest potential beyond traditional power production and steelmaking and trying to maximize the value of that resource. AmeriCarbon's particularly focused on the near-term production of a strategic pitch intermediate chemical from coal as a route to many of these carbon products, kind of an enabling link, if you will, to the whole coal to product manufacturing chain. And all of this can be done in what we think is a very environmentally friendly and responsible manner. Think of it as the other green technology. In fact, utilization of coal-derived carbon in applications such as wind turbines and solar panels, in a sense, would actually help enable renewables. Kind of ironic if you think of it that way. Next slide, please. So there's a vast array of possible carbon products and applications, both commercial and military. The current carbon production market, as Bill was alluding to, today is $10 billion, and the expected exponential growth in the next 25 plus years is projected to be 100 billion. So this is certainly an opportunity to pay attention to, and one that we think the state can play. Next slide, please. So it would be ideal if we could directly convert the coal into the end-use carbon product, but that's rarely possible, with noted exception of some folks here today who are pursuing some of those routes with good success. One of the most common pathways is through a coal tar intermediate pitch. Think of it kind of like ethylene in the gas industry as a petrochemical building block for many products. This is the path and the technology that AmeriCarbon is focused. Coal tar pitch is used today to produce large carbon anodes, for example, in the electric arc furnace industry. The source of that coal tar pitch largely comes from coke ovens today. It's a byproduct of coke production used for steel making. The U.S. has shut down most of its facilities due to the loss of the steel industry and environmental challenges posed by those type of plants. Europe's in a similar boat. And today, approximately 85% of the world's supply of coal tar pitch comes from China. Next slide, please. So AmeriCarbon is developing a proprietary coal to pitch process based on coal liquefaction. We're utilizing our 10-ton per day pilot scale facility, which should be low and allow us to approach a rapid commercialization path. It's the only known pilot scale unit of its kind in the US and maybe in the world. And unlike coke ovens, our process produces intentional coal tar pitch. And it maximizes the carbon from the coal into that primary pitch fraction, leaving very little waste. In fact, one of the byproducts can actually be a potential source of rare earths, which adds additional value to the process and produces another critical material that the US, I think, so desperately needs. The process itself is extremely environmentally friendly with a very low environmental signature and capable of producing what we refer to as tailored pitches for select carbon products and applications. All of these products are likely to have their own specifications in respect to either their manufacturing process or the type of properties that you need for those advanced carbon products. Next slide. Viewed another way, we believe that it's critical to forge cooperative relationships and partnerships on each side of that manufacturing or supply chain. We have and will be spending quite a bit of time on that part of the equation to help ensure everyone succeeds along that way, because that's the only way that we're all going to kind of get there. Next slide, please. We also believe now's the time to invest and take advantage of the opportunity due to the confluence of drivers that are in play. Exponential demand growth in the carbon market, favorable economics, having the available affordable coal, supply chain resilience, US coal, bring back that critical material or minerals onshore, and carbon emission reduction. AmeriCarbon's process is environmentally very superior with respect to current coal tar pitch practices and very carbon constrained from beginning to end of that process. Next slide. This slide describes a little bit of the particulars of the current $4 billion pitch markets that there and the growth projection that we've discussed a bit. And we're certainly very optimistic and enthusiastic about that opportunity and link in that whole chain. Next slide. In terms of deployment, one of the visions we have is that it could be very optimum to site these plants right at existing mine mouths or prep plants. Modular capacity addition is possible, and there's already necessary infrastructure that can be shared with regard to those existing mining operations, and transportation is typically very readily available. So why sell coal at $50 a ton when you can upgrade it to a product that sells for maybe 20 to 50 times that price or more? So in fact, why stop there? Why not put a complete carbon manufacturing and infrastructure in place where towns or regions can be extended to that model throughout the state where it makes sense, adding high value jobs and opportunities. You know, West Virginia is sitting all over the resource, and there's no reason why we can't think in this state why we can't adopt and go after the entire manufacturing chain for more high value products. I mean, you can almost hear John Denver singing Country Roads in the background, but truly, I believe some version of that type of opportunity could exist for this state if we're able to find a way to support and enable that. And I guess that's about it. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think we talked about this one, so continue on. Next slide. So yeah, so you can read about my partner, Greg Henthorn. He's also a native West Virginian and sometimes sings Country Roads, but on mute. And I like it that way. Next slide, please. And this is just a picture of our pilot research manufacturing facility located in the industrial park in Morgantown, West Virginia. And that's about it. Bill, back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, sir. Bill Easter is our next speaker. He's the CEO of XMAT. Bill?
Thank you, Bill.
There we go.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. We're going to be talking about coal-derived building components. And my name is Bill Easter, and I work for XMAT. Next slide, please. So as we talk about these coal-derived materials, building components, really want to hone in on several material characteristics. So even though these come from coal, approximately 70% coal powders in every product. They're non-combustible, they're fireproof, and they have high strength and in both the compressive and flexural properties. So one will be able to actually build different kinds of buildings. If you know anything about building materials, they're very strong compressive strength, but not much in the tensile. And they're very lightweight compared to the traditional building materials. They also have abrasion resistance, they're chemically resistant, and they can handle high temperature operation. Next slide, please. So many of you are familiar with the Coal House in Williamson, West Virginia. So it was built in 1933, and it used bituminous coals quarried out in these big blocks, and 65 tons of bituminous coal. And as my partner at the Center for Applied Research and Technology in Bluefield says, this will not be the last coal house built. Next slide, please. So Brian had talked about a partnership or collaboration, and this is sort of the big demonstration project in my mind is building a coal building or coal-derived building materials out of this. And when my wife heard about this, she said, "Oh, that's going to be ugly. You know, look at it, it's going to be made out of coal. It's not going to look pretty." And then this rendering, it's quite elegant and quite beautiful. And so we'll be making tiles and bricks and blocks and different facades, panels, different out of that. And we'll be using West Virginia coal. so we're going to make a new market for this. And as all our materials, the carbon from the coal is sequestered. Next slide, please. So one of the products, the X bricks, X blocks, and going back to that coal building, we would like to use not only our products that we're doing, but other people's products, insulation products out of coal, whatever. We'd like to highlight other people, other inventors I know are talking today, but other products that could go in this building so that we can sort of highlight what could be done with coal-derived building materials. So these X bricks and X blocks will go into the building. They are stronger, lighter, and we think will have higher R values as well. Next slide, please. So this is the product that's farther along. It's the roof tile, a lot with the slate replacement. You can see that X tile feature you can mold in and put different types of features, which you can't do with slate. Then you have to make a whole roof. You have to make hips, ridges, gables, and starters as well. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that has perhaps a little less standardization that you have to get through, or not quite as severe, is facades and panels. And this looks like a really good place to set up business and make some money, and not only for new houses, but also retrofitting existing businesses. Next slide, please. So again, here's some more looks at, again, these can be beautiful, elegant buildings, and and you can look and see where the coal derived blocks, bricks, panels, facades can go. Next slide, please. So here's another building, and you can see this rendering where the roofing tiles and the panels and the bricks and the blocks can go to make this building. Next slide, please. And again, to summarize, as we look at why would you do this? Because you're going to get better property. It's going to be a better product than what's currently out there. So building materials, concrete, bricks been around millennia, and so we're taking the carbon from the coal, making superior building materials. So non-combustible, fireproof, high strength, both compressive and flexural, lightweight, abrasion resistance, chemically resistant, high temperature operation. And we are setting up our pilot line in Bluefield, and like to have people come down and see us. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. I promised you some discussion of funding opportunities, and our next speaker is Matt Harbaugh, who is Managing Director of Mountain State Capital. Matt?
Great, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on. So Sarah asked me to talk a little bit about types of funding that could be available for entrepreneurs interested in commercializing products using carbon. But I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about how we created Mountain State Capital and the problem that we saw and we were trying to fill. So really throughout Appalachia, there is this issue where if you're an entrepreneur and you have a new product idea or you have a new technology, maybe it was developed at a university, but at some point, you're probably going to run into this issue where you need to go to other people and raise outside capital to grow that company. And if you really want to grow it quickly and you think it's a really big market opportunity with sort of a global customer base, you may need to raise quite a bit of capital. And that source tends to be a gap in Appalachia. And so my partner, Mike Green, and I, Mike's in Morgantown, we set out, and it took us about 3 years to raise our first fund of $20 million to help entrepreneurs fill that gap throughout Appalachia. And we call our region the Greater Appalachian region. And define it as stretching from Western Pennsylvania to Eastern Tennessee. Within there's a lot of great universities. There are entrepreneurial programs in the states. There are nonprofits that are helping people start businesses. But by and large, there's almost zero private sector venture capital available for those companies. And so we set out to raise this fund, and at $20 million in the grand scheme of things in the US, that's a tiny, tiny fund. But it's a start. And our goal is to prove that we can find great companies in the greater Appalachian region, that we can step in and be that first institutional investor to help them get off the ground. And that with our money, as well as monies from nonprofit partners and grants from the government, that we can help bridge the gap and get them to the point where they're really growing and scaling, and in many cases then can go on to attract much larger sources of capital from national sources, but help to fill that initial gap and get them on the right track. So we launched this fund in very beginning of 2019. It's been less than 2.5 years since we started investing out of this fund. We've already been able to invest in 20 companies in that short amount of time. I think we're probably the most active seed stage private investor in this region, in the Appalachian region, and we're really finding some great opportunities. So lots of reasons to be very hopeful about this sector in this region. Of those 20 companies, about 35% of them are either in West Virginia or came from technologies that were developed at WVU or Marshall. And those are some of our really exciting companies that we're helping to grow and scale. Technology-wise, they range anywhere from software to life sciences to agricultural technologies. These companies tend to be very, very small when we invest in them. Maybe they're just a few people at that time, but they have the potential to grow to be very large and to scale quickly. We usually start with an investment somewhere around $200,000 to $500,000 in each of these companies, but over time, we are able to keep investing in those companies up until the point where we've invested maybe $1.5 million or so per company. So that's an overview of Mountain State Capital and what we've been able to do to address that gap in the Appalachian region. But I will say that one of the things when we were creating the fund that we expected is that we would see more startups that somehow were related to the energy sector and had developed energy related technologies that could be scaled and turned into fast growing businesses in this region. And one of the areas that we were most excited for is this concept of creating high value products from coal and from carbon in general. I think there's some what we've found is that there are still some other gaps that are preventing a lot of these technologies from getting to the point where we can step in with our venture fund and pick them up and start to run with the ball. And so, you heard Dave Barry say it, and I wrote it down. He said, you can develop products that sell for 20 to 50 times the price of coal. That's tremendous. Those are great opportunities if we can get them commercialized and out into the market. But Dave also said there was a little throwaway statement that Dave made, and he said, if we can find a way to support and enable it. So I think there's this opportunity. There are these markets out there, but there's clearly a gap for these types of products. And I think that what we've seen, and I'm going to tell you about how we're partnering in West Virginia with a company called Keylogic Systems and with the National Energy Technology Laboratory to try to solve that gap. But what we've seen is that in a lot of cases, the gap is you can develop it within a lab, but at some point you need to partner with larger companies to do a pilot project, to scale it up, and to prove something to the financial markets so that then they can step in and help to fund it and finance your project. These tend to be more capital intensive projects. So a tiny little fund like ours may not be sufficient to get it where it needs to go. And because a lot of the researchers who are developing these technologies are brilliant scientists, but they may not be able to bridge the gap into the business side of the marketplace, and they may not have the relationships with the large energy producing companies or the landowners that they would need to put a site and put a pilot plant somewhere, in addition to the relationships in the financial market, which are going to be crucial for these types of businesses as well. So to help solve those problems, and because NETL is right here in West Virginia, it was really a great opportunity to say, how can we start to stitch these things together and create a stronger pipeline so that in the future, maybe a private sector fund like Mountain State Capital or others will have more deal flow, will have more companies in this sector for high value products from carbon. And so what we did together with Keylogic and with NETL is create a new nonprofit that's called the U.S. Research Impact Alliance. And the word impact is important there. The idea is there's a lot of research happening within universities, within the DOE National Lab System, and it's not able to get out into the marketplace and have an impact because of these gaps, because there just aren't that many private sector investors who are willing to step in at that point and take the risk, and they may not have the patience and the time horizon that's required for these types of technologies to mature and get to the market. And so it's a good space for government and foundations and nonprofit entities to step in and say, we're going to step in and help fill that gap and provide capital and provide matchmaking between technologists and larger corporate partners, help provide support for some of these pilot projects, help provide support for finding sites. There's a lot of work that can be done in there sort of between the lab and the marketplace. And this is such a great opportunity with high value products from carbon that I think it's really worth investing the time and effort to solve those problems and fill those gaps. So it's exciting. That new entity, the USRIA, if you want to check out their website, it's just usria.org. Right now it's kind of virtual because they're waiting on a grant proposal to the Department of Energy, but hopefully it'll get off the ground and help to move some of those technologies along together with their partners at NETL and at universities and to organizations like Keylogic. So that's exciting. That's one gap that we saw here in this region for those very early high growth, high tech types of companies within this carbon related space. But there's also another gap, which is when you're looking especially at trying to impact areas in southern West Virginia, areas that are your traditional coal producing areas within the state, you have issues around infrastructure, you have issues around site preparation, where ultimately what you want is jobs. In the northern part of the state around the universities and some of the other areas that have these high tech startups, you're talking about how do we commercialize technology. But in some of these other areas, you're really saying, how do we create a large number of jobs to fill in for the coal-related jobs that have been lost? There, it may not be the high-tech startups that are your solution. I think ultimately, maybe years in the future, some of those high-tech startups grow to be large enough where they can put a big plant in those areas and produce a lot of jobs. But in the short term, I think you're really looking at how do we reuse some of the resources that are there, the real estate, the infrastructure, the knowledge of the people, and find other industries and sectors that can step in and provide the jobs that are so badly needed there. There, I want to say that we've identified some other gaps, and these are larger gaps. So a little fund like Mountain State Capital would definitely not typically be able to step in and solve these. But working with the folks at the State Development Office and others around the state, as well as now an important asset that I think everyone needs to be paying attention to is the new interagency working group that Brian Anderson mentioned at the beginning of this event. They're hopefully will be more resources pointed to those areas of the state to try to identify what can be added to the mix to provide large numbers of jobs. So there we do, I will say even with our current small fund, we get approached because we're really the only private sector venture capital fund in the state. We do get approached with some of these large jobs with big companies that want to come into West Virginia and set up a new plant. And they even talk about setting up a new plant in the southern part of the state. But they come to us and they say, well, all we need, we've got this gap and it's $10 million. And, you know, we have a $20 million fund. That would be half of all of our money going into that one thing. It's not realistic for us to step in with a small fund like this and do it. But through some of these federal resources that can be pulled into these projects through this interagency working group, my hope is that we'll start to see some of these things start to move. When we talk to our friends at the State Development Office, they say, oh, if we only had that bit of money to fill the gap, we've got companies that are approaching the state that want to move here, want to set up these big projects. So it's not something maybe that Mountain State Capital can directly impact, but I wanted to mention it because I'm really optimistic that with some of the things that are happening nationally, with the work that Senator Manchin's doing, with the work that Brian Anderson's doing at NETL, I think that we actually are in a position now where we might be able to see some of these bigger gaps also get filled around the state. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Matt. My longtime friend, Brian Joseph, is our next speaker. Brian is the president and CEO of Touchstone Research Laboratories here in Wheeling. Brian?
That helps, doesn't it? Okay. Can you hear me all right, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's great to see you and wonderful presentations. And so this is my business here along Interstate 70 in the northern part of the state. Could you go to the next slide, please? What we do for a living here is we invent things. We invent lots of things. This is some of our patents on a couple of the walls. And once we invent things, if you go to the next slide, please, we spin out businesses. So in the last 4 years, we spun out 3 businesses. A testing laboratory business. It's got 2 locations in West Virginia and 1 in Ohio. Seafoam, which Matt, we went all the way to Australia to raise the money for that on the Australian Stock Exchange, and then Touchstone Advanced Composites, which is still 100% owned by Touchstone. But so we're going to keep spinning businesses out. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to focus today on these 2 businesses, Seafoam and Touchstone Advanced Composites, specifically because of what they do with coal. And I want to tell you a little story. So you can go to the next slide. This is really fascinating. So there's this gentleman at MIT, and Touchstone and MIT work very closely together on a number of things. Mark Goldthorpe will tell you that in our lifetime, the population on Earth has exploded, but it really didn't have any influence on us because the people were very poor. They didn't buy anything, didn't sell anything. So from our perspective, it's as if they didn't exist. What's happened in the last 20 years is these people have started to gain wealth. And so you have a growing population, an increase in wealth, and what's that going to lead to? That leads to all these people are moving to cities. They're moving to cities at the rate of 1 million people a week. So the question is, well, so that's going to lead to, we have to double the number of buildings on the face of the earth. So if you look at the last, he would say 5,000 years, we built everything you see. We're going to double that by somewhere in the year, around the year 2050. They're moving to the cities at the rate of 1 million a week. So he says, okay, so everyone in the energy area is focused on how do we operate stuff? But he said, that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is what are we going to build the future society from? There's not enough wood on the planet. If you use concrete, it's going to generate a huge amount of CO2. Metal, it generates a huge amount of CO2. So what are the solutions? And that's what he's focused on. So if you click one more time there, I think, so the answer is going to be, he believes, materials from hydrocarbons. That is either methane to carbon nanotubes also making hydrogen as a byproduct, which becomes a fuel, which seems fantastic to me. Or in this case, we take coal, we grind it into powder, we heat it under pressure, blows up into a foam, and then we heat it again. And a panel of foam has nothing in it but coal. That is just coal, just heated coal. And so, could be very inexpensive to make on a really large scale. And we're going to show you how that's likely to happen. But he thinks that these are the materials of the future. We have to go to our hydrocarbons to solve our problems. By the way, a byproduct again is hydrogen. Go to the next slide, please. So the Department of Energy has funded a $2 million program to the seafoam business, which we very much appreciate. And the goal of that program is to reduce the cost of production by 80%. So we're going to go to a continuous, I don't run that business, that is now run by somebody else, but they're going to go to a continuous operation to make a continuous product. And it could even have a lower carbon footprint than plastic foams, which is just amazing for coal. So we can go to the next slide, please. So that's the seafoam business, and it's got many, many, many applications, but one of which would be, and the one we all want to really get to, and Bill, I really appreciate what you're doing with coal and your whole approach there at XMAT. That's the market we need to get to that'll be really helpful for creating jobs and keeping the coal industry moving. But I have another business. It's a little more high end. In this case, we buy the foam that's made from coal from the seafoam business. We glue it together, machine it into shape. So we make the molds for next generation carbon fiber aerospace products. Go to the next slide. So, and we do this for everybody. So we bake the molds to make the new supersonic airplanes, or to make the new infrared telescope, or there's the rocket nozzle for Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit. So that's what that company does with coal. Next slide, please. One of the huge things that we could do is, and this is a seafoam business, is they're starting to develop a sphere that could be used as concrete additives or in proppants. This could use hundreds of millions of tons of coal per year, which is pretty exciting. And again, all the carbon is sequestered. None of the carbon goes into the atmosphere. Next one, next slide. We're also developing a silicon carbide foam from coal, which may revolutionize concentrated solar power. Next slide. So I was asked to be, really specific. What can the federal or state governments do to be helpful? And I think there's three things that came to mind. One is increase the spending on coal to products, because if you believe what Mark Goldthorpe at MIT say, it's going to play a very important role in the world. And if we're going to build all this stuff, why don't we build it with things that could come out of the US? Very few people could compete with the US because we have so many hydrocarbons. Number two, SBIR currently has a match for certain federal contracts called SBIRs. I would like to see that sustained. That's really important going forward. Number three is MIT's looking, they'll be looking for funding for what they call their carbon house. And if we could get that funded, and I will support you, Bill, completely on getting your houses built, because those are the things we have to do to launch these products into worldwide. So thank you so much for having us here today. This has been great.
Thanks, Brian. You're always exciting and excited. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Our next speaker wheeling into the frame there is Chuck Zellick. Dr. Zellick is the Chief Market Development Officer, Mineral Oil Ore of Omnis Regenerative Energy, LLC. Chuck?
Hello, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, appreciate it. So my name is Chuck Zellick. I work for a company called Omnis Regenerative Energy. So just to give you a little background about myself, I live outside of Wheeling. I'm from here. I actually come from a family of coal miners that felt the pain of the decline in the industry. I've worked for the federal government for about 21 years at DOE. working on fossil energy for 10 of those years, and at USDA for a significant portion. And being from this area, I'm very passionate about job creation and economic development in the region. Being an economist, one of the things that I've worked on over the years is actually looking at projections. EIA was mentioned earlier, the Energy Information Administration. I actually was responsible for leading the development of parts of that model that actually represent the coal sector. Even with the advent of CCS, for power generation, we're talking about a lifeline for the coal sector. I was at the W.A. Parrish plant, which was, it's in Texas. It was mentioned earlier where the Petronova project is, talking to the plant manager. This was a few years ago. They build or burn $300 million worth of coal in that plant every year. $300 million. So every time one of those plants go under, probably a significant portion of a mine, if not a total mine, goes under. That costs jobs and economic development wherever that coal was sourced from. The senator mentioned earlier, Senator Manchin, even with pro-coal policies, plants continue to retire. So, there's the whole mindset approach, the fixed versus growth mindset. And I do believe on this panel that the businesses, Brian, Bill, and others, finding markets for coal that don't completely rely on power generation, that's where the growth prospects are for the industry, and the economic development that comes from that. The significant demand for housing, high technology parts and things that carbon can contribute to, that's going to be a significant player in the well-being of West Virginia. But I'll get to why I'm here, I guess, or why I was asked to be here, and about the company that I work for. In my role at DOE, I traveled the region, looking at businesses. I came across the business that I'm employed with now, and I realized right away, if successful, this company has the ability to be disruptive. We have a plant, it's going to be operating next week. It'll be the first of its kind in North America. What we do is we actually, it's at the Bailey Coal Prep Plant in Western Pennsylvania. It processes coal tailings, or those big sludge ponds at coal prep plants that are actually prevalent throughout the area. In some places they've been covered up, in other places they're open. We can take that material, and the person who owns the company actually invented a process that takes the material and produces two product streams out of it. One we call carbon ore and one we call mineral ore. So if you think about coal, it's composed of biomass that was buried under pressure, hundreds of millions of years ago. Same thing with oil and natural gas. When coal is mined, you not only get the carbon, which is what we're after, but also the ancient topsoil that grew the trees that created the coal. Sulfur and other minerals are great when you're able to put those on agricultural applications for yields and so on. Not so good when you run them through a coal plant and burn them. You get SOx and NOx and other pollutants. So, during the process of mining, the coal is washed, attempting to get to the highest percentage of carbon that can be recovered. Unfortunately, a lot of that carbon washes off. It's combined with that ancient topsoil, and hence you have these sludge ponds. So the technology for the company that I work for, Omnis, we actually recover the waste and put it through a process where the particles are pulverized and reduced to a very small level. And then a nanoparticle is introduced into the process that binds with the carbon. So what that enables us to do is recover the remainder of the carbon from that coal waste and actually separate it from that ancient topsoil. So the carbon ore, which is the carbon recovered, it's absent of sulfur, absent of nitrogen. If you burn it, it has a heat content of about 13,500 BTU. So just by burning that fuel in a conventional coal plant, if the boiler can handle that heat content, you're going to increase the thermal efficiency and lower CO2 emissions. You also don't have all the other bad things that happen when you combust coal, SOx and NOx and so on. The mineral ore, which is the area that I'm responsible for, actually is composed of the minerals that were in the topsoil that grew the biomass that created the coal, or the carbon. It also has rare earth elements in it. And actually, one of the areas we're looking into is through the production process, we're also creating hydrogen. So when I saw this technology, it's disruptive, right? It has the ability. So if you talk about a win-win situation, people that support coal, it produces cheap electricity. It has, you get the economic development that results from the mining and the plants that burn it, the resiliency, the reliability. The detractors usually criticize the mining and the land degradation, the CO2 emissions, the other emissions that occur with combustion, and then the waste from burning the coal, the ash, and also from the coal prep, which is where our plant is addressing the issue. This technology addresses all those issues. If you burn the carbon, it enables you to use the existing infrastructure that you have. You might have to redo the boilers in the existing fleet to handle the heat content, but then it actually, enables those plants to burn more efficiently and cleaner. And at the same time, it produces a product that enables regeneration of agricultural soils, which has also been a big issue lately. Within the mineral ore that I'm responsible for, it's 38% kaolinite, and then the remainder are other minerals. Kaolinite in itself is also known as China clay. There's a robust industry for that. Most of the production takes place in Georgia. That mineral is actually used in paper production, ceramic glazing. It's actually used as an organic pesticide. We've done internal field trials with this material, and it has the potential to increase yields on cropland as a soil amendment, 30 to 300%, depending on the state of the soil when we apply it. So I guess the reason that I'm really excited about this technology is, number one, it eliminates the waste impoundment. So you have environmental regeneration and improvement. It could enable the use of the existing coal-based infrastructure. You don't have to put a padlock on the coal plants and the mining operations. You could actually repurpose the labor towards waste cleanup and continue to use the existing infrastructure, which saves the communities. Because a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of technologies, it isn't so much about the creation of jobs, but a very important part is where those jobs are created. And ideally, if you can create the jobs where the current jobs that you're losing are located, that's a win. We're lowering CO2 emissions, lowering other emissions, and it's just a good story all the way around. So we're due to turn the key on our first plant in the U.S. Next week. Actually, it's the first of 8 planned modules at the Bailey Coal Prep Plant. At full capacity, after all 8 modules are up and running, which should be about this time next year, we'll be processing about 3 million tons of waste a year. And from those 3 million tons, we'll be producing 1.5 million tons of the carbon ore and 1.5 million tons of the mineral ore. That's significant. And actually, although we're located in Western Pennsylvania, the idea or the goal of the company is to have 100 of these facilities located around this region where the environmental cleanup's necessary in the next 10 years. It's a job creator. I think it's a story that is bipartisan. Both sides can get behind. And we're really excited about it. And just to give you one more application of what we're doing with this technology, we're actually involved with Consol, since we're located on their property. And we're a partial recipient of a Coal First Award, which is through DOE, Office of Fossil Energy. One of the things that our technology does, I've been talking about how we can recover coal waste and turn that into product, but we could also take conventional coal and we can run it through our process and essentially remove the ash before we burn it. So we have a project where Consol is the lead to build a plant there by where we're located, run the fuel through our process, remove the ash, increase the heat content, and then burn it in that plant at 97% capture. So carbon capture is critical there. And then co-fire that with 10% biomass. So Consol has plans to convert 25,000 acres of its mine land, and also in relationships with other farmers to grow biomass. So when you burn 10% biomass at 97% capture, you actually have a net negative biomass energy CCS plant. So actually we'll be actually storing more CO2 than we're emitting than when we started. The final thing I would touch on as it relates to the mineral ore is carbon offsets. So when we talk about the mineral ore, it has the ability to rehabilitate degraded land. So I've been working with several large companies in the region. I'm not permitted to say who they are yet, but you should be seeing it in the news here pretty soon. Around the effort of approaching landowners for the purposes of generating carbon offsets, voluntary carbon offsets, which could be monetized. Some people here might have heard of the Indigo Ag model, where you engage with farmers and landowners to grow trees, to do no-till farming, cover crops, things like that. So we have a technology we're doing a joint venture with that will, that these other business models, farm size below 1,000 acres, it's prohibitive cost-wise to engage with landowners that are less than 1,000 acres. Well, that basically takes this entire region out of the game. right? Average farm size 200 and 250 acres. We have a technology where we could actually automate the measurement of soil carbon on as small as 100-acre plots. So what that does is it makes it cost effective to come into this region and engage with landowners to improve their landscape, to improve the environment, to utilize our material, hopefully, to generate carbon credits, which then we can monetize. So, you should be, when you see it come out, you'll know that, you know what I'm talking about. But I do think the ideal, I guess the reason I'm really excited about that is because I've worked around the technology space for some time. So federal grants, state grants, job creation, income, it accrues to a few players, right? Business owners that own a technology that generates electricity. Some of the benefits are distributed to the population, but for the most part, there's an income disparity there. This type of solution actually takes that income and transfers it and distributes it to landowners. So you hit a greater part of the population, and it actually helps job creation and income, economic well-being, to a broader extent along the land base. So I know I'm probably over time here, so I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
It was, Chuck. Thank you. Let me, we still have a few minutes in our schedule. Let me ask Matt Harbaugh. Matt, you said that there's basically zero private funding available thus far for these innovations that we've been talking about this morning. Are there policy changes that we could make to encourage more private investment?
Well, so one policy change that Brian Joseph mentioned that I think is really important is, and this isn't necessarily to encourage private investment, but just to help these high-tech companies get off the ground, is the SBIR matching funds. So that's a state program in West Virginia that I'm not sure that there's any funding allocated for it for the coming fiscal year. So that would be something to definitely look at re-upping for the next year. I know it's been impactful already. And SBIR funding is federal funding. So you're matching state and federal funding in that case to help these startups get off the ground. All of that does help to reduce the risk for the private sector investors who can then step in after that federal funding has removed some of the technical risk in the project. Other policy issues that or changes that could happen. I know that Senator Manchin sponsored a bill that would provide some tax incentives for some of these, especially some of these larger projects that I mentioned that could be happening in the southern part of the state. So that, again, I think is a good way to encourage private sector investors and some of those larger investors to come in. In general, I think it's got to be you've got to be able to draw the connections between state, federal, and private sector resources for any of these projects. None of these are going to be small dollar projects if you want them to get off the ground and scale to a meaningful size. So we have to be looking at integrated solutions where we're bringing all three of those pieces together, private, state, and federal, and getting them to the same table to talk about how can everybody pool their resources to get some of these projects going.
Okay, Matt, thank you. I know that Bill Easter had somewhere he had to be, and he was supposed to sneak off into the sunset at 11:10. I see he's been kind enough to stay with us. So, Bill, I question.
That's real interesting,
Yeah. One question that I wanted to ask you is how far are we away from seeing coal-built buildings everywhere, like we see cinder blocks now?
Yeah, it's a matter of you have to make money. I mean, so whatever you come up with has to make money after the government, help sort of leaves. And so I would say that the blocks could happen real soon. The question is, is it going to be economically feasible? Can we get some purchase orders to bring, scale? Every time you scale 10x, you drop cost 30%. So if people have been, guy makes 7 billion bricks, you have to kind of get up there to go against it. But the products themselves are moving along. I would say, 1 to 2 years we'll be able to do it. The question is, in some sort of volume, we're making a 100 square feet roof that should be done next month. So, you move progress along, but the bricks and the blocks are probably the hardest from a straight financial. The facades, the panels, the roof tiles, you can make money at it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
We have a very thoughtful question, actually series of questions from Tom Haywood that I would like to read here and direct to the whole panel. Tom says, potentially the best days of coal are ahead of us. Many West Virginians and folks in the industry I speak with question the job creation potential of coal in uses other than power generation. How should we think about the future job creation potential of coal, both in terms of mining, but perhaps more specifically in terms of advanced manufacturing and other uses? Could the future number of coal jobs exceed the current and past number of coal jobs? Having reasonable projections about future coal job numbers could be very helpful in advocacy for this incredible substance and resource. So, panel, what say you?
So, right. So I'll start because I suspect Bill's going to say something, probably the same thing, which is per ton of coal, there's probably less than 1/10 of an hour. It's probably 1/100th of an hour of somebody's time to generate a ton of coal. To take that ton and make a block in Bill's factory or a panel of seafoam, that's probably an order of magnitude more people, maybe 2 orders. It's 0.4 hours per, right? Well, per ton. It's probably in the, let's say it's an hour or 2. Then if you go and make the house from it, now you're talking tens of hours per tons of coal. So from my perspective, when we go and turn into products, the amount of labor we generate skyrockets. And I think we can absolutely increase the number of coal-related jobs by probably an order of magnitude or more. Bill, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I live, I'm a Texan and a West Virginia at the same time. So I've lived in both states. And the difference between Texas and West Virginia is this: they take the oil and they turn it into plastic and chemicals. And so the tax base is working on $1 to $2 a pound. And then you got, a nickel, 3 cents a pound in West Virginia. So, I hate to, and I didn't know much about this at all. Coal sort of found us. It's a beautiful it's the most cost-effective carbon source on earth. And that it sort of found us, but going to Wyoming and I'm talking to these guys and they're, hey, I get $0.015, per pound. And then I said, well, what happens to coal? Well, we put it in a railroad car and Warren Buffett gets $0.05 a pound. I'm like, wow, I don't want to sold anybody, but man, that's a rough reality. We need to change that reality that the value add stays in the state. And if you do that, then the jobs will be there.
Yeah.
I think that you have direct, indirect, and induced jobs. I spent a career looking at that. And, even if the demand for coal increases, technology is increasing as well, and mining technology is increasing. So, your labor productivity for miner, is increasing over time, and that trend's likely going to continue. So it's more about these, affiliated industries that Bill and Brian, are mentioning, and can those jobs be retained in the state? Because, in this state, in this area, and I think a big mistake people make, I tried to get this point across when I was working across these states at DOE is, we have to quit looking, especially around the northern panhandle, is West Virginia versus Ohio versus Pennsylvania. If you live here, it's not like that. It's a region, and collectively keeping the jobs in this region. My first job was in West Virginia, and I lived in Ohio. I drove across the river. stimulating these industries and keeping them here, it should be paramount. That should be priority number one.
Yeah. And Dave, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing. Per ton of coal, you add value, what? 100 times? 1,000 times?
Yeah, pick a number. We hope more, right?
Right.
And we're only the first link or the front end part of that link of that whole manufacturing chain, right? So I think we're all talking about the same thing. I mean, there's opportunity right now in the state because we're sitting all over this rich resource. You could go build these manufacturing operations all the way from not the resource itself and putting in a coal car, but all the way through the final product, the rocket nozzle, the supersonic plane, the Aston Martin carbon car. I mean, pick it, and so opportunities there. So how can the state realize that kind of vision? I think I mean, it's there. It really is.
I'd add one more thing. When I worked at NETL for a period of time, I ran a group that did economic forecasting, and trying to hire new employees that wanted to work on the topic of coal, first finding anybody with that experience and then finding anybody that wanted to work on that when, in the university, they're being drilled renewables. It was a challenge. But now when we started looking at, advanced manufacturing and things like that, then it was too easy to find people that wanted to work on that. So, integrating coal in with these next generation industries, it's crucial. It's crucial, if we want to see the area survive.
Well, I'm psyched, and I hope the rest of the audience has been as well, from the speakers and panelists for their great presentations, which we appreciate, and great thanks for the generous support of our sponsors. This has been, I think, a really good webinar. If we have learned anything this morning, it is that the future of CCUS is bright, as is the future of West Virginia, if only we just go for it. So to borrow a phrase from WVU, let's go Mountaineers. Thanks everybody for showing up. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks
so much. Take care.